Bruce, before the break, we looked at the context for your use of the term monkey blood from the early 1980s. I want to look now at a document from 2004 that you've referred to. I think we've seen it, I think, in one evidence session previously as well. MACK 301952. This is a letter from Professor Franklin to Charles Kennedy MP, May 2004, and it talks from a more modern perspective of risks of blood-borne pathogens. Professor Franklin says in the second paragraph, the risk that a blood-borne pathogen might be transmitted to recipients of blood products can never be removed entirely. This is why blood products should only be prescribed where the expected benefit to the patient clearly exceeds the risk of infection or the known consequences of a likely infection. As I stated in my earlier letter, zero risk is impossible. Blood-borne viruses which are known to have been transmitted to people with haemophilia include, and then we have HIV, hepatitis A, B and C, hepatitis delta, human parvovirus, GBVC virus, sometimes called hepatitis G virus, TT virus, and then some reference to viruses transmitted through transfusion, or known to have been transmitted or implicated in post-transfusion hepatitis, so SEN virus, West Nile virus. You, I think, by reference to this and indeed a range of other materials, believe there's still a need for there to be proper research about the range of viruses and ill effects to which those who have received blood products and indeed those who've received transfusions may have been exposed. Is that right?
Yes. Without long-term follow-up, you can never know implications. And I don't just mean long-term follow-up of the patients. I mean, if we're talking about people within breeding age who have children, we need to make sure there isn't something being replicated in children. I mean, TT virus is a herpes virus, but it comes from mice. The current recombinant DNA products that are used for haemophiliacs are made from hamster cells that were mutated, and one of the drug companies admitted to TT virus being in those products. So one of the things is, without touching too heavily on my closing remarks, is that we have to develop systems for monitoring that are credible. So when you're given not just blood, but an organic medicine, a medicine that has organic motility, has the potential to bring something with it that is undesirable. The only way that you can be sure is to actually have a permanent record that follows that patient and a note, an understanding within medicine. If it's a bit weird, but you don't know what it means, you still have to write it down. I mean, I can remember being told often enough, you know, well, your blood results are all a bit odd, but there's nothing definitive. Well, maybe all a bit odd is something that is definitive in its own. We're not looking hard enough. And one of the things that has continually annoyed me as a haemophiliac campaigning is the idea that you can measure any of us in singular viral terms. So with a scheme set up so that you have a specific Hep C line, a specific HIV line, you're failing to take account of the fact that none of us are singularly infected. None of us were mono-infected in the terms of a singular exposure. We were exposed hundreds, if not thousands of times, depending on the viral load per product, to different viral particles. And there was lots of different viruses in there. We have no idea, and I would defy anybody in science to tell me, because show me the model that you would use, what the long-term implications of that are. So without following the individuals you've done this to, the haemophiliacs, you've no way of telling how much harm you've done. And they've made such an effort not to record things that even in England today, I can't get a health minister to tell me how many haemophiliacs are still alive in England. I've got to go through the FOI system via a mate who's particularly good at it to get up-to-date annual figures on how many haemophiliac A's, how many haemophiliac B's are still alive in each country. Epidemiological evidence that should be in existence. But we should also know how many of our partners, like my wife, had cancer. Is there statistical anomaly there? We do not look, we do not know. So without looking, without looking at the children of, without looking at the sexual partners of. We don't know if we've contained this. We don't know what longitudinal implications are. There might be a surprisingly positive one. I doubt it, but we're not looking. So without data, you can't make informed choices. Yet we've lived lives where data has been used against us, weaponized. You only get in stage 1 payment because your hepatitis hasn't reached this quite artificial barrier. I don't believe your HIV came from haemophilia, you're a junkie. There's all those bits where we've had to justify ourselves in single viral paradigms, but we're not a single viral paradigm. We have been collectively affected from childhood as our bodies were developing, before immune systems were fully clicked in, with viruses that would be able to lodge themselves in various parts of our bodies, our brains, affecting cognitive development, affecting everything from social interactions to the standard of education, the standard of living we might have attained, our overall general health, the threat we might be to others. I mean, is there a possible link between my Epstein and Barr and my wife's breast cancer? Don't know. Nobody's looked. I know nobody's looked globally, but then there is a trend in that that's obvious. It's like, why would the people that have done this want to look at how much harm they've done? And the only conclusion I can come to is the reason that we have this HIV, Hep C paradigm written into the schemes is really to keep us distracted from, wait a minute, we've got all of these. And it didn't stop once, well, heat treatment, yeah, it killed off ones with lipid coats that had fat coats on them, but all the herpes viruses got through. Now, small grade inflammation in a child's brain that can be set up by something like TT virus or SEN, that could seriously impact on cognitive capacity. We're not measuring them. We're not recording data. Where's the science?
And on a similar theme, is this right? You're also concerned about there being an insufficient consideration given to the extra hepatic manifestations of hepatitis C.
Undoubtedly. Just one of the things that I'm continuously angry about is the implications on the circulatory system of Hep C and then also later of interferon. Both have impacts. Cardiomyopathy, damage to peripheral nerves through capillary damage. I've got severe peripheral neuropathy. I know most of my friends have similar conditions. Even the brain fog could be quite literally bits of your brain have been damaged. I know nobody's bloody looking. I mean, I tried to get a functional MRI done on myself a number of years ago to see if I could answer a question about why I was struggling in particular ways. We're not looking at these things. We're not looking at the damage that's being done.
And I think we can probably just see that illustrated. It's the last document I'm probably going to ask you about. It's BNOR 40568. And it's another document that you've flagged up. We can just, I think, look at the abstract. It's a 2014 publication. Hepatitis C virus-infected patients are known to be at risk of developing liver complications, i.e. cirrhosis and liver cancer. However, the risks of morbidity and mortality are underestimated because they do not take into account non-liver consequences of chronic hepatitis C infection. Numerous extrahepatic manifestations have been reported in up to 74% of patients from perceived to disabling conditions. And then if we look at just the last paragraph there, beyond the liver, hepatitis C virus chronic infection should be analysed as a multifaceted systemic disease leading to heavy direct and indirect costs. The accurate consideration of extrahepatic consequences of such a systemic infection significantly increases the weight of its pathological burden. The need for effective viral eradication measures is underlined. And we can see some of those consequences that have been reported include cardiovascular, renal, metabolic and central nervous system diseases.
Yes. I mean, these are all things that I've sat in rooms with haemophiliacs and I'm seeing, I mean, I've got enough nurse training, enough experience in my life to recognise that, oh, he's a bit slower than he was a few years ago. His conditions got worse. The behavioural stuff that we see when people are upset isn't just PTSD. There's other elements. I mean, your brain's has been flooded with the biochemical side effects of virus and the impacts on the liver. That toxic mix creates problems in itself. I mean, when we're talking about developing children, of course, then you're further complicating it. But the idea that it's a hepatic virus, let's just look at that, is idiotic. We are a system. As human beings, we are an active system. The virus is injected into us. It goes right around our body. It might have a profound effect on your liver, but your liver also then has a profound effect on the rest of your body. And the virus can have insidious effects on other parts of your body, most notably neuro tissue, which has been recorded more recently. I did think about putting the research in, but it's rather complicated. I haven't worked out myself yet. But the idea that, I mean, this is why I get upset at the schemes, with the idea that you can actually sort of put us into categories. You can't, right? There is no science in that. It's only about trying to save money, really. You're just categorizing us in these headline things that are easy for the newspapers to take in, but are not based on reality. Extrahepatic manifestations, we've all seen them. We've known friends that have died of strokes, cardiomyopathy, heart attacks. We've got friends that have got conditions that we can see reflected in these sheets. And then we're told when we go to government or we have to deal with a government, oh, no, there can only be that condition. I mean, I've asked for a bathroom grant, moved to a new house, I need a bathroom that's disabled adapted. I'm using myself as an example, but only because I don't want to name other names. I could name 15 people I know in similar positions at the moment. I need my bathroom adapted. I asked the grant system for it. I was told, it's not your hepatitis, it's your heart condition, so we won't give you a grant. No point in applying. And this is the bit that's right. We go for grants, we phone them up, say, can I try a grant? You're not going to get it. So, when people are giving you evidence, they're saying, well, grant applications are going down. Yeah, because we're not going to give up every piece of privacy to be told bugger off at the end of it. If the woman at the beginning, when you phone them up and say, well, look, I need my bathroom adapted so that I've got a level access shower, because within the next 2 years, I'm not going to be able to lift my legs up. No, you're down. That's a heart condition. That's got nothing to do with hepatitis. The idea that you can't... I mean, I came from a generation, and I'm sure those that are 50 and plus will remember this. Remember dying from wounds post-World War II in the 70s and 80s, right? Died from wounds was not an uncommon thing to have on a birth certificate. What makes them think that this level of insult, that amount of viruses, that number of viruses given to children with very immature immune systems wouldn't have a long-term impact on systems? We know that it causes capillary shrinkage. The moment you shrink a capillary, that's your nervous system going to be damaged because it's not getting blood. The moment you shrink a capillary, that's your brain damaged because it doesn't get that. So you've got peripheral neuropathy, you've got neuro impacts, people becoming sluggish, people becoming slow. All of those pathologies are already written into it. But when you go to the scheme and you say, I've got this heart condition, I really could do with having a level access bathroom, or in the case of one of my friends, a flipping ramp to the door, we're told, no, it's the wrong condition. You can't apply for a grant here. Or in the Scottish case, I mean, they got really cheeky in that we won 27,000 and the borderline for applying for a grant's 28. So the whole system's designed to take the piss out of us. Why is it a surprise that they decide to narrowly define an illness that they know can't be narrowly defined? It's an attempt, it's about money, it's about bookkeeping, it's not good science, and it doesn't match the harms.
Going to move now to some of your campaigning activities. And so we can take the document down. Thank you, Seamus. You've detailed your involvement with a number of groups and organisations in your statement, and I'm not going to ask you to repeat what's in your witness statement, but I just wanted to ask you about some of the general aspects of involvement in campaigning over the years. We've heard a lot of evidence from a lot of individuals about stigma. Was there, in your experience, has there been a tension between the stigma associated with monkey blood, hepatitis C, HIV, and the need for publicity in order to be able to garner political and public support as part of campaigning?
Oh, there was definitely tension between the two factors. I mean, I had people that were very angry at me. In fact, I know that there's people very angry at me, my involvement in how this inquiry came about, who wanted to lay it to rest. And I totally get that. I mean, the truth is I want to lay it to rest. I just can't lay it to rest unsolved or undealt with. I mean, it's stigma. I mean, when HIV was associated with haemophilia, I was sacked from my job as an unacceptable disease risk. I went into work one day in the hospital, called into the side room, 3 senior nurses, head of school, career over, walk out. I went back to Inverness, got on a train, went into a pub, met up with a few guys that I used to drink with, thought I was at least going to get some company and relax. One of them turns around and says, "Have you got AIDS? It's in the papers, all you guys have got AIDS. You're not drinking with me." I ended up with smashed glass right in front of my face. In a pub full of coppers, and there was nobody going to stop that guy from stabbing me. So stigma, yeah. But I think those of us that got the worst of it, I ended up homeless, I ended up on the streets, I slept in corners around here. I built myself back up from that. Right, so there's 2 reactions to stigma. One is, you're cowed by it. And I can understand that, and I'm never going to put anybody down for being cowed by it. So you stay silent, you stay compliant, you don't say anything. Or you go, fuck you. You did this to me, and why am I carrying the burden for this? But I've had incidents as recent as 2 years ago where my viral condition has definitely played a part in some very unpleasant interactions with other human beings. So the guy that these guys came to know, the bad-tempered, slightly sweary jock, actually comes out of that reaction to stigma. What do you do with that? I mean, it's the reason why I've got low-grade gorilla written on the top of my Twitter description at the moment, is there's 2 reactions to this. I actually took a lead from Stonewall on this. And, that, you know, if they call you queer, yeah, be a queer, fuck you, I'm a queer. They call me a low-grade gorilla. Okay, I'm a low-grade gorilla. I don't care. I have had the shit kicked out of me because of stigma, literally. I have ended up on the streets. I've built myself back up. And there are rooms full of people that have done that. Right, the survivors. We have struggled to stay here. We still face stigma. We still face those points. Dentistry. God, I mean, it's like, I remember saying to my new dentist, a wonderful woman, how nice it was to go into a dentist that wasn't full of plastic. Because all the time I've been down here, I was going to dental units that were like some kind of mafia hit room. They were covered in plastic. I was just waiting for somebody to pull out the silence gun and give me a shot. It really was that dystopic. So it gets you to the point of breakage. You know, I've seen so many of my friends fold under this. Or you have to fight back. And this is where I do have some guilt in my family, because that stigma, once you go public, it doesn't stay with you. You might have felt it stayed with you, but it doesn't. It goes to your kids. It goes to your partner. They feel it in work. My wife had to assure her work she wasn't infective. I think there's probably a couple of times where my son was in fights that might have been because his dad had been on the news the night before. And I've seen friends kill themselves over it. I've watched people die. I've watched people mentally fold to the point where they're ended up in secure institutions who have done horrible things, but not because they were horrible, but because lives. And I do think this is true for many of us. When you're faced with this kind of stuff, your life becomes a reaction, becomes an act of survival, and you live in that space. And only because I've been lucky enough to have a partner who was professional, I didn't have to live with quite that degree of desperation that so many of the other guys have had. But it's still there. It was still a driver. You still knew that people, well, I have a very small social circle. My wife mentioned it in evidence. You know, it's like I don't go to parties because the first thing that the reference, the standard middle class reference in particular, is, what job do you do? Now, what do I say? I'm a house husband, political campaigner, These days I just tell them I'm a lobbyist. Nobody wants to ask you anything about that, I've discovered, so you can just say you're a lobbyist. But it's always there, right? I mean, as a bloke in your 20s, you've got to justify, why am I working? Why is your wife working? And why are you at home? So your existence within Stigma becomes this point where you either have to justify yourself continuously to society, or you develop a thick skin and go, I don't care what you think of me. And I went to that place because it was the only place I had mental survival in.
The other, or another, impediment to campaigning must presumably have been, in addition to the stigma that you've powerfully described, your own ill health.
Yes.
How have you sought to address the tension between the desire to campaign, or indeed the desire to research, to solve the jigsaw puzzle, and your health?
I haven't. I've been really bad to myself for years. I've pushed myself to almost destruction on a number of occasions. I'm sitting in front of you just now with less than 10% of my normal pain control. I've got a sharp pain in my spine that feels like somebody's knifed me, and I just live through it. And I think that one of the things, again, that's common in haemophilia is we endure. We've been through severe pain. I've had bleed in my spine the size of a man's fist. I lost the use of my legs. I had to learn to walk again. We're tough little buggers. But did we have to be? And it's the effect that me being tough and me being this uncompromising individual has actually had on my daughter and had on my son that I actually find the most disturbing thing. I feel like I'm in a position of no choice. It's like you fight or you fold. So you have your own personal relationship with that idea. And then you've got your family. Because you're fighting, begin to fold. And you end up with this complete dystopic, uncomfortable position where you want to protect your family. Without the campaign, I'm pretty certain that the economic support that's given to Hep C's, without me there, wouldn't be the way it is. So do I settle myself with the idea that all of my friends at least have the right to be average, because that's what the numbers were that we used in Scotland, average salaries, the right to be ordinary, against the fact that my daughter and my son have suffered, that they are still struggling to get them way in the world, 13, 24-year-old. There is no support for them. The schemes don't recognise them. There should be support for them. Just because their dad happens to be older and had kids at a certain age, why are these kids suffering? My son needs to go get money towards tickets. At some point, I'm going to have to find £3,500 so he can go and drive diggers and earn a decent living. My daughter wants to go and do her PhD. She's really bright, scarily bright. But she hasn't got any money to do a PhD at the moment, so she's working all hours to try and pull together enough cash so she can afford to go and do a PhD. Things where me, as a middle-class dad, would have put my hand in my pocket. And on top of that, we still don't have housing stability, because, yes, I moved house into a nice bungalow to cope with, basically, I want a house that's not going to kick me out until I'm going out feet first. The house I was in before would have given me major problems as my condition progresses. But it means that we've bought a bungalow, which by definition means I've paid more for a piece of land than I would have done if it was a two-storey house. I've got less house for more money, and I still have to adapt it. So I'm supposed to support my wife, support my kids, help them into adulthood, and then find some way of saving out of that bit of money that I get to adapt a bathroom, to provide a ramp and maintain the house. Oh, I can pay a mortgage till I'm 74. And we're all facing that. And all we're looking for is normal, a ground floor, a place to start, leveling the playing field. That house that I live in now was for sale when me and Christine first looked at moving to Inverness. It was $100,000. I ended up paying £283,000 more for the same house that if both of us had had a wage 30 years ago, we would have bought then. So I feel like I haven't even caught up with myself. And the rest of these guys, I bet you they haven't caught up with themselves. And that has an impact on your wife, on whether or not you stay married. That has an impact on your children. And all the time it has an impact on you because you're not adequately dealing with your family. There's economic stresses. God, the number of times I used to have to search the couch, and again, I know I'm not unique in this, cutting open the bottom of the couch so I can pay for my kids' school dinners. All the time going back to doing this and being told, well, no, it's like you don't need any money, you don't need support. You can claim benefits. And there's a statement of, like, the scheme's not working. Benefits. So they're exempt from benefit calculations. That sounds really good when they're negotiating it. But in reality, what you're actually saying is you're paying us £1,000 less than you should be a month. Because that's how much the benefits are worth. So all you've really done is you've just moved it from one budget to another because it suits government to spread budgets around. I've learned that.
Can I ask next, Bruce, what the impact of your campaigning activities and the questions you've asked, the views you've expressed, have been on your relationship with the medical professionals upon whom you rely for treatment?
Well, that brings me right up to my current health problems in the modern day. So when I got my notes, what little there was a common thread that was there. I'm sure it's common in a number of people that are within this room. All of my notes, my referrals to various doctors had either the phrase, this man is a campaigner, or this is a difficult patient. Which meant that I went through to see a cardiologist who was only going to give me short shrift. I went to see an orthopod who was only going to give me short shrift, because I'm a troublemaker. Right, I'm a threat to them, and I'm marked, and it's gone through to my GP, and my GP's behaved towards me as if I'm this troublemaker, if I'm this illogical lunatic that's crying at the sky and accusing the doctors of being part of some big conspiracy. And as a result of that, he appears to have missed a series of blood tests and a CT scan that clearly indicates that I've got a hole in my heart, probably since birth, well, definitely since birth. And I'm now in end-stage cardiac failure, and without surgery, I've got less than 5 years to live. He had that information for 12 years. And I'm sure that I am not alone in getting a lower class of medicine, just for the simple fact that I question things. I take my doctors under advisement. This is the bit that always gets to me, right? Doctors aren't special, right? You've got a series of talents, but to me, they're no more than mechanics for my body. Sorry, medicine, but you're mechanics for the body. You're very bright mechanics, but you're mechanics for the body. Now, if I take my car into Joe Blogg's garage tomorrow and he wrecks it, I'm not taking it back to Joe Blogg's garage, but you expected me to take my body back to you time and time again. Do you not think I'm going to have questions about why you're doing what you're doing? I'm not being a pain in the arse. I've been infected on the NHS and I've got questions. But it reflects into your notes as a troublemaker. It reflects into your notes as somebody who is over-egging their ill health. So you get sent to a shrink instead of get sent to a cardiologist. The shrink doesn't understand the biochemical damage that the liver's doing to your brain, so you're actually not going to get a solution through talking to a psychiatrist, because what you're suffering from is a biochemical impact akin to the type of encephalopathy that alcoholics get, that's depressing your system, your immune system depressed, further depresses your system. So even expressions of depression can't be treated or dealt with in the same way as you would deal with them in other people. You're trying to say this to doctors. You're trying to have an intelligent, cooperative, collaborative relationship with them. But all the time, playing in the background is, don't call things by their proper names because doctors don't like it.
Right. I wanted to just ask you a little about your involvement in the Penrose Inquiry. Again, you've referred to this in your witness statement, and you'll understand this inquiry is not an inquiry into an inquiry. But my question is about what the impact of your involvement was on you.
Every day, because we didn't have YouTube, is one of the reasons why I was a big advocate of this inquiry on YouTube. Every day I had to wait until after midnight to get the inquiry report, to read what witnesses, read the evidence as it was coming out. I would sit at midnight and I would write out comments, questions, this hasn't been answered, that might be misleading. and then feed it back to Jamie and our QCs and see if we could get anything done. But I realised very quickly that I was sailing against the wind on that one. But there was points, I'm not joking, where I was sat on the floor crying, devoid of any hope. And the strangest thing is that it ended up being a meeting at a football park and a play that turned that round. I was suicidal for parts of that blooming thing because I knew it was hopeless. I knew I didn't have the right parameters. It wasn't looking at the right time frame. It had excluded Hep B, which was ridiculous in terms, especially looking at blood products. And he refused to look at longer term viral risks. The time frame was the time frame. The diseases were the diseases. And as I said at the beginning of that inquiry, that means that you're never going to see the real story. So it resulted in me spending much more time doing political lobbying. And the one thing that we do have in Scotland is a receptive politic. So I could get to see the First Minister. I could get to see the Health Minister. And then within the opportunistic elements that you have to have when you're a campaigner and you've not got resources, we had this play, and the play ended up being really important. One, it gave me a chance to actually say, well, actually, this is what I think. Right, forget what the inquiry's saying. With the greatest respect to Lord Penrose, forget what he's saying, right? This is the case I wanted to make to the Penrose Inquiry. I might never get to make it to any inquiry, but here it is in dramatic form, a little bit coded. If you know what we're going on about, we just didn't want it to go at the festival as the anti-vax play, so we took that bit out and just tightened it down. It still tells the story accurately. And as a result of that, suddenly a lot of people came back to me. And this was actually part of my mental health recovery, very much, at the back end of this. So I took this then Scottish Culture Minister, now, by the time Penrose reported, the Scottish Health Minister, Shona Robertson, to the play as my guest, as Culture Minister. Come and see this play, Traverse Theatre. And I will remember this to this day in detail. She's a lovely woman, got a lot of time with her, known her since they first entered the Parliament, which is a unique relationship I think haemophilia has with the Scottish Parliament, is that the ones that were there in 1999, we have lobbied since 1999. So we've grown up with them. So I took Shona to this, and she was about the Commonwealth Games were coming to Scotland. So she was all about the torch. I'm going to go and get the torch. And I was very pleased for her, and she was really happy about going to Canada to pick up the torch to bring to Glasgow for the Commonwealth Games. We bought her a drink, went into the theatre. I very deliberately, sorry Shona, very deliberately sat between her and the aisle. So she was stuck. We watched the play. She got quieter, more uncomfortable, which is a feature of the play. I've seen it happen in a lot of people. On the way out, I'm escorting her to her ministerial car, and I said to her, good luck in Canada. And she says, I don't think that matters anymore. And the fact that finally I felt like, oh shit, I've hit home at last, was probably something that saved me mentally. That I could actually drive those points in. I could make those points. But at the end of Penrose, just to finish off, I was angry, upset, pissed off, really unwell, and don't think I have fully recovered from the level of exertion. I've probably taken years off my life doing that, trying to make sure that something came out of it. But it had to be done, because otherwise we just wasted our time.
And the play, I think most of those sitting here probably know it, but perhaps not everyone who's listening will. The play was put together by, is it Hamish MacDonald?
He was the writer, but Matthew Zajac, whose theatre company it is, was the initial contact. We all have a friend in common, a man called John Martin, who's one of these people that knows everybody. Highland seems to be full of these people that know everybody. But John introduced me to Matthew. Matthew's a political theatre company. Dogstar is a political theatre company. And I just chatted to him, you know, he thought about looking at this. I'd actually watched his play, The Tailor of Inverness, which is about his father as a Polish refugee during World War II and post-World War II. And I felt like these were people that I could maybe relate to. So we all went to Cali football. All of this happens on the bottom north stand in Cali football. In between passages of play and swearing at referees, we discussed this. And Hamish is an extraordinary individual. So what you see in the play, almost word for word, and I'm afraid including all the swear words, is actually exactly what I said to him and exactly what Robert said to him. He just wrote it out, went off on his own right because they had their own legal protection that they had to cover, and then double-checked my homework and came back. And if it hadn't been, we couldn't get funding for it in Scotland. We couldn't get funding from the Arts Council. We couldn't get funding in England. In the end, thanks to Matthew and Hamish's association with a theatre company called Profiritaten in Umne in northern Sweden, and the fact that they were a part of the City of Culture, European City Culture thing, they gave us enough money to develop that play, which meant that one of my great memories of it is I got to watch the ice break up in northern Sweden in spring. It was quite extraordinary. But I also got a hint of exactly how powerful the play was from the start. We had a massive compliment, and we actually had invited, the theatre company had invited two ethics doctors from the university to it. And then every night, for the 4 nights that the show was on, he brought classes to the show. And I said to him, what are you doing with this? And he said, oh, we're discussing it when we go back to class. What did you take from it? What do you understand from that? Then the play went off, and we went to, eventually I joined up again, because I felt hugely responsible, because we had a number of episodes where people had fainted, burst into uncontrollable tears, and not uncommon had become frozen to the spot, couldn't move. Lights were up, house lights were up, everybody left, and you'd see these individuals that were just stuck. And I felt hugely responsible for them, so I would go and talk to them. In the case of one person in North Wales, I remember buying her a gin. Just, you need a drink, love. There's somebody to come and pick you up. Get your husband phone. Here's a gin. Calm down, what's the matter? Oh, I realised that my doctors lied to me about my nephew's death. It's from the play. And you suddenly think, shit, this is really powerful. I've said this stuff for years, but because it's like 90 minutes, Hamish is an incredible writer. He's managed to squish so much in this art politic that suddenly I'm getting this feedback from people, and it seems to be feeding back into the campaign, and I'm getting more of these guys going, actually, that fits with this bit, that fit. So as much as I came out of Penrose upset, angry, the First Minister agreeing to sort out some kind of economic support, we can have discussions about what was wrong with that because I was involved in the negotiations. But the real thing I took from that whole experience was that finally we had a tool where our narrative, our questions, not the questions everybody else thinks we want to ask. No, I've got a virus. I mean, I'm never good at, I'd use a Scots phrase, I'm not a poor wee anything, right? I don't, I haven't got a virus, give me money. You gave me a virus. You caused this to happen. You lied about it. That's where I'm coming from. And I've spent my life determined to try and prove that there was some form of liability tied into this event rather than a poor wee me response, a moral payment. Yeah, I'm not sure what else I can say about that. It was an extremely useful tool. It still is an extremely useful tool. I get very impatient with journalists and etc. who I'd say, right, watch the play and then speak to me.
And for the record and for the transcript, the play's called Factor 9.
The play's called Factor 9, the testimony of Robert Mackey and Bruce Norval, and it's still available online. It just needs to be Googled. People will find it if they want to watch it. Half the money at the moment is being made on it's going to the Memorial Trust to try and build a memorial in Scotland to our dead. The other half's keeping tour music artists in bread and butter, if nothing else, during COVID. But it's become one of the most important tools. It's actually been better than any documentary involvement I've ever had.
I want to ask you finally, just for your reflections on a couple of things your wife Christine said during her oral evidence in 2019. And this is in terms of what drove you to campaign, to research. She said this: I think he felt worthless, but at the same time he was wanting to not campaign but to get to the bottom of this, to find out exactly what had happened and to find the truth out. And then this, she says, it's the first thing he will speak about in the morning, and it's the last thing he will speak about before he goes to bed. And within the day, no matter what the conversation is, we don't go half an hour without him discussing it, without somebody phoning up, without him looking on internet. And no matter where we go, what we do, he's constantly speaking to people, looking at things, putting two and two together, and he's done this from his bed a lot of the time. Is that a fair description of...
Yeah, sweaty, horrible, unwell, puke bowl beside me from time to time, big swollen knees, knackered ankles, cardiac problems in cold weather, so I couldn't go out, and literally lying in my sick bed, Googling things, going through research documents. Some of the American universities, you can get access to the libraries, and then phoning up individuals I knew that would understand bits of it to discuss it so that we could actively pull things together. But yeah, I mean, I'm not well. I'm very not well. And my wife probably just felt like she was watching me destroy myself in the room. I mean, I'm not going to preempt what I'm saying at the end, but there is an apology to my family written into it. I realised what I put them through was hellish. And there is times where I wonder if, for my kids' sake, it would have been better if I hadn't been in the house. Now, I can't second guess that now. They're 24 and 30. You know, it's. My son complained last night that he can't argue politics in a pub because of me. He says, because you factor stuff in a very particular way to understand politics. As a result, I'm very good at political betting, by the way. But you factor stuff in politics in a very particular way. My son says, that means I can't talk to anybody my age about politics, because they can't understand it. You have to put, but that guy's got this and that guy's got that. Until you understand, you know, this guy's an English nationalist, this guy's, no, until you understand all the factors, you can't predict the behaviour. And therefore understand how your vote's going to be weighed. And my son's got that at 24. But, sorry, Rob, it's like you haven't got any other 24-year-olds you can talk to about it.
Bruce, those are the questions I'm proposing to ask you, but I want the opportunity for your representatives and indeed any others listening to suggest any further questions. So, sir, could we take a break, perhaps of about 20 minutes?
Yes, if you think 20 minutes will be long enough.
I think it should be.
It'll be no less than 20 minutes, shall we say, and aim to be back here then at 10 to 5.
Thank you, sir.
10 to 5.